So this is Co-op Academy Manchester, so I can zoom in a little bit further and those microhabitat points will appear. So this is a map that they've created. Of course, not every setting is going to look like this, with playing field and having tall wild plants and lots of trees. We recognize there's a whole range of settings, but habitat mapping can be done by any setting, regardless of how big or small your outside space is and your site is as a whole. So certainly something that's worthwhile going on, interacting with this, getting your students to interact with this, and looking at all the different data layers. You can see, as I mentioned, got site boundaries based on habitats, but all these other activities, some of our biodiversity surveys, our iNaturalist activity, we've got our Hidden Nature Challenge, Habitat Heroes, we've got activities around looking at your local environment, so weather, microclimate, shade, and environmental quality, and then we currently have one external layer on that. And if you're wondering how to add data to any of these layers, if you're using the map, just simply click on the information button right here, and there is a link to that activity. So if you see one of these activities and you're really interested in it, based on what you've seen on the map or curious to know more, just simply click on the information and then you can click here and that will take you straight to the activity. So that's what we talk about when we talk about getting yourself on the nature park map. So now back to why you're all here today, and that is the habitat mapping. So we'll just give this a second to load. So what is habitat mapping with Nature Park? Well, as you might have guessed, it's a method to map and record all the habitats within your settings boundaries. So from potentially large playgrounds to just the smallest little areas that you have in your setting, any nooks and crannies where maybe some nature is living or even no nature. And it's really a way to really get an in-depth view into your site. We were at a school about 2 weeks ago, and we were doing habitat mapping. We had gone along to help them a little bit with their habitat mapping, and we'll talk about, if you need help, what resources are out there. So we had gone to help them a little bit with their habitat mapping. We were working with an eco club, and immediately we went out and they started really noticing bits of their site, and this included the teachers, bits of their site that they really had no idea that were there, little pockets where nature was living. So it's a really great way to really help you appreciate everything you've got on your site. It's really turning your students into scientists. All this data that's being collected, this is all contributing to real world data sets, because no one's really knows what is on the educational state in terms of habitats, and I'll dive into that a little bit more. So it's really an important data set that your students are collecting. And then also for your site as a whole, you'll see how habitat mapping weaves into the nature park journey. That's collecting data for the hopefully evidence-based decisions that you'll be making later on. Of course, it's an essential first step in your journey. It's really sort of, if you imagine your setting and your site as a lab, it's really sort of prepping your lab for all the work that's going to be coming down the line, and all the curriculum integrated activities that you are going to be doing. I'm very happy to say that over 1,200 settings have mapped at least part of their site. You can see one here, Rose Hill School. So as you interact with the Nature Park map, you'll see that settings up and down the country, that settings all the way from nursery all the way to college, have all been engaging, huge amount of engaging with the habitat mapping and getting part of their site on the map. So where does it fit in with the 5-step cycle? Hopefully this is a graphic that you'll all be, at least you'll have seen or be somewhat familiar with. Well, as you can guess based on what I've just said, it fits in with the getting to know your space aspect of the nature park cycle, as I mentioned, with setting up your sort of site as a lab. What's the value of habitat mapping with nature park? We're going to go over how to do it, but what's the point of doing it? Why should you take the time to do it? Well, it really helps you and your pupils understand your site's resources before making any interventions for biodiversity. So let's say, for example, you map your site. You might find that one area of your site that you thought, okay, maybe we want to make some changes in this area. Maybe that site actually has a lot more biodiversity than you first thought. and maybe there's an area that you thought was already pretty green that actually is a bit less green than you thought. Any resources that you might have used for that first area might be wasted and might take away from biodiversity, and you might then use those resources for the area that's actually not as green as you think. So it's really about, evidencing the decisions that you're making and really understand what's going on. Of course, it's an opportunity to develop green skills. This is our green skills framework here in the bottom corner, particularly things such like GIS mapping skills. For those of you that don't know what that is, GIS is Geographical Information System. So it's a system that creates, manages, analyzes, and maps all kinds of data. It provides a foundation for mapping and analysis that's used in science and in almost every industry. So our GIS software is handled by Esri UK, who some of you might be familiar with. And if you go on their website, you can see countless ways, or if you just search GIS, you can see countless ways that people use it. We went to a conference recently, and you've got people like the police force. They're mapping, rates of crime in different areas using GIS. So then they can see, okay, there's, this sort of crime in this area, but not that sort of crime in this area. And then maybe they can start looking and seeing what the difference is between those areas. So, whether your students are going to be going into jobs in forestry, finance, having these sorts of skills down here on the right is really, really critical. And as I mentioned, it contributes to a very valuable data set on England's educational estate. If you've had any interaction with the Nature Park before, you probably have seen sort of the line that we use, that all primary and secondary school sites add to about double the size of Birmingham, which is a huge area. And no one really knows, what is on there in terms of habitats or in terms of biodiversity. It would be impractical for us as a Nature Park team to be the ones to go out to every school site and really see what's going on there. And also would not make any sense because we don't know what's going on in your school setting, and there's certainly no way we would have the time. So that's where you and your students come in. You're really, we're trying to provide, the tools for you to get a very, very interesting and valuable data set that you can then use to do a lot of wonderful and exciting things. It allows an estimation for existing biodiversity for individual settings, but then also the nature park overall. So you can measure the biodiversity on your site directly through nature park activities such as pollinator count, iNaturalist activities. We're also working on a grassland survey, but also indirectly by habitat mapping. So we can look at similar habitats that have been mapped on schools where we know a lot more about the biodiversity, and we can then make estimates of the potential biodiversity that we might see in a school site based on that similar habitat that's been much more highly investigated outside. So this then allows us to potentially predict potential gains if changes are made. So for example, if you changed a small part of your playground that probably has little to no biodiversity to a patch of wildflowers, what might we expect to see as an increase in biodiversity? It's also very important because satellite data is not always accurate. There's errors and quite low resolution. So this is just a quick example. This land cover map, which has been collected through satellite data, estimates that there is some fresh water here and that this area here is arable land. But if you clearly look on the map that has been put together by the students of Co-op Academy in Manchester, you can see this section is ground without plants. And if you look a bit closer into it, you can see that this area right here that the satellite data is called freshwater and arable land is actually a football pitch. So it's a AstroTurf or 3G pitch. I'm not sure exactly what sort, but definitely not freshwater and definitely not arable land. So it's really, really important, the work that you're doing alongside your students. One thing I just want to mention is that we're talking about your baseline habitats. So the habitats you've got at the start of your nature park journey. If you're making any changes on your site, through your nature park journey, or if you've already made any changes in your site potentially already, as you're sitting here today, that you've made whilst part of your nature park journey, make sure you put those on the tracking change tool. So that's where we track, you track all the changes that you've made, and we're essentially comparing what's on the tracking change tool to what's on the habitat mapper. So the habitat mapper is your baseline, the tracking changes for all those changes, and we're comparing one against the other to see the hopeful great increase in biodiversity that's been brought about through all the great work that settings have been doing. So if you have already started your nature park journey and you have already made a change, put that on the tracking change tool and then put the habitat that was there beforehand. So what habitats are we mapping? 8 broad categories that you can see right here on the left. Hopefully all, this has been designed and it's been tested to make sure that we're covering all the potential habitats that might be seen on a school ground. And so these broad categories are then broken down into finer categories. So grass and wildflowers gets broken down into things like playing field or lawn, wildflower patch or meadow. Same with ground without plants, gets broken down into things like non-natural and permeable surface, non-natural permeable surface, and there's a whole range of other things. All of these habitats have their own activity pages where there are a range of activities with them. So this is the tree activity. This is one that we've done with primary school students, we've done with secondary school students, and it's gone very well with both. Again, all these activities and all the activities part of Nature Park have all been stress tested and tested by students and by educators. So you can have confidence that a student has seen these activities before. So this is the one around the tree survey and really getting to understand a tree. And then you're using those flow charts. Your learners are using those flow charts to making a decision on how to record that data through the habitat mapping. So following the flow chart, say for trees, not just labeling it as trees, but maybe as a mixed woodland or an evergreen woodland or a broadleaf woodland. So before using the tool, make sure that you are registered with the Nature Park website. The habitat mapping tool is behind a login. So you do need to register and be associated with a school to be able to access it. And do make sure you've completed your site boundary. I'll show you what a site boundary is in a moment. But yeah, make sure you've completed your site boundary before adding your habitats. Also try some of our scaffolding activities. Here's just a few of them: Hidden Nature Challenge, Habitat Heroes. What habitats do we have? And we've got plenty more in the resource library that I'll show towards the end of the webinar. But just to put a highlight on two, or spotlight, sorry, on two that have recently come up onto the website. This is an activity or resource for Key Stage 1 and 2, about an introduction to habitats. So this is a PowerPoint that's there ready to use, and it's exploring the habitats with a focus on the diverse habitats found across the UK. And there's some images from that resource. So we're trying to focus on habitats that you might be mapping potentially with the habitat mapper, habitats that are in the UK. And then this is one for a slightly older group, so Key Stage 3 and 4, and this is talking about the biotic and abiotic factors that are in habitats. So again, these are on the website and ready to go and ready to use. So these activities that you can do before habitat mapping as a way of scaffolding your learners and getting to a stage where you're comfortable doing the habitat mapping and really learning more and more about habitats. So how to access the tool, I'm going to show this just in a second. But you log into your Nature Park account and make your way to the habitat mapping page, click the launch activity link, and then for any of the Nature Park digital tools, if you see this blue button here, make sure you click it. If you try and log in, if you press this down arrow here and try to log in here with your Nature Park account, that will not work. So anytime for any of the digital tools, if you see this blue button here, make sure you click that and that will bypass this page right here. So now we're going to go on to the habitat mapping and how to do it. So this is the habitat mapping page. As I said, there's a video right here and information on how to use it, things to do beforehand, and then also how you might do it with your learners. And here are all the pages for the different habitats that you might encounter. So I've logged in, and you can access this through your dashboard, or you can search for habitat mapping here on the search bar or through the resources page, and you'll be able to get to it. There's also a link to a blog on how the habitats that you and your learners are identifying really contributes to real world biodiversity research. So I click launch activity. And up pops the habitat mapper. So I'm just going to close this, but if you realize that you really want to see that splash screen again, you just click info here and it pops right back up. You can change your base maps. There's a whole range of different base maps that you can use. So this is a browser-based tool. So this means that this can be used, obviously I'm using it on a laptop right now, but it can also be used on a desktop, it can be used on a phone, could be used on a tablet, so it can be used out in the field as well as back in the classroom. So you can see all the different habitats that have been mapped by settings. I'm currently based at the Natural History Museum, so that's where I'm going to map. So we will just zoom in. Oh, that's a bit. Zoom into the museum just down here. So when I refer to a site boundary, this is a site boundary that I've made with the Create Your Site Boundary tool. So it's a different tool to the Habitat Mapper. Works in principle the same. What you're doing is you are clicking on Create a Site Boundary. Your mouse is going to turn into crosshairs, and you just click, 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 and you can make any sorts of shapes. If you're, I recognize obviously not every setting is a perfect rectangle like that. And then you put in your URN, it automatically populates your settings data, like your postcode and things like that. And then that's a live edition, and that will then pop up on this habitat mapper right here. You can also do site boundaries for as many different sites that you had. So let's say the museum had a site here, but let's say the Royal College of Music turned into the museum and also Holy Trinity Church. I would make one site boundary here, one site boundary here, and one site boundary here. There's no limit to the amount of site boundaries that you can have for one setting. So that's just briefly on site boundaries, but we're going to go over on how to use the tool for habitat mapping. So what you do, click on edit, and this is going to bring up the whole different list of the different things that you might be mapping. So we encourage you to start with areas, then go down to lines, and then go down to microhabitat points. So starting at the big things and then sort of working your way down. So simply what you need to do, we'll map, and we'll do it in that order for today. We'll map an area, then a line, and then a point. So let's map this area right here. And as I said, you can do this on any device that can access a browser. So I've gone out, learners, and we have worked out that this is an area of grass and wildflowers. What we do to map it is we simply click on that there, click on grass and wildflowers. And when you click on any one of those things, you'll see as I come onto here that my mouse has become a crosshair with the dot right there. So what I'm doing is I am adding points. And as you can see, as I'm creating an area, that area will formulate. So I do one click there, single click, single click, single click here. You can see the area is already starting to populate. Click here. And again, this is the same with the site boundary tool. You can make as complicated a shape as you would like. Let's go right here. And then to finish the shape, I just double click right there. Because I already selected grass and wildflowers, it's already populated this group, grass and wildflowers. But it's great to know that, but we really want to see what the habitat type is within it. So by using the flowchart, we'll have worked out what habitat, what type of grass and wildflowers it is. So let's say we went through the flowchart, my learners went through the flowchart and they worked out it was a meadow. We click meadow. Because I've done it within my site boundary, it's automatically linked to my URN. So this is just a dummy URN that we use for demonstrating it. So I've got, it's my grass and wildflowers, I've got its meadow, linked to my URN. Simply click create. And now that is a live addition and a live change that's been made to the map. So if I accidentally clicked out of this, that would still be there when I opened it back up again. So after you click create, that is a live addition that's been made. There's no need to sort of save it or something like that. As soon as you click create, that is saved. So no need to worry about that. So now let's go over doing a line. Let's say I'll do this area as a line of trees. Again, I will just simply click here, click here, click here, and then double click to finish that. Under trees, there's only one category, and we really encourage you to use the ones that's recommended. So click there, automatically link to my URL, and I'll click create. Now let's add a point. So let's say we've got a water butt right there. So I'll click on water butt. Let's say we've got a few of these actually. So I can just simply click one right there, click create, and then it still has, so after you click create, it will still give you the option to keep going. You don't have to go back if you want to add more of those habitats. So let's say that we've also got a water butt right here. Because it's a micro habitat point, it's just a single click. And I can click create. Now, what if I have added a feature here and I realize actually this meadow is not as long or is not as big as I thought it was sort of upon looking at it again. What I simply do is I can simply scroll up and click on this, select by point, and I can click right there and I can edit my meadow. So when you click on it once, you can see this square right here. That means I could just drag and move the entire thing completely. But if I click on it again, you can see all those orange dots are where I clicked with my mouse. So what I can do is drag them to slightly refine the shape. And if, say, I wanted to make an indent right here, I simply click on this white dot right here, and you can see more of those have appeared. So I could click on these as many times as I wanted. And then I could say, okay, it goes in right there. And it goes in right there. So what I need to then do is press update. So when you update, that is similar to pressing the create button, and that updates the feature. And again, that is a live change that has been made. Let's say I realized that actually after mapping these, that these water butts, that this water butt is actually doesn't exist. So what I would do, again, edit feature, edit by point, click on that, and this would be the same if you're doing it for an area or for a line. Click delete. Now make sure it reminds you, because there's no undo button. You click delete, and that is gone. For these other ones here, select by rectangle, select by lasso, you can use those as well, but that would just potentially give you a much, well, that would give you a much bigger area, and you could go to each of these and then do only select this feature or edit this feature. So it depends on how detailed your map is already. Which of these we would recommend using select by point, because this potentially, if you had a lot of habitats that you had mapped on here, this could potentially get quite full and potentially get quite confusing. So that is how you add on your points, how you add on your lines, how you add on your area. So I'm just going to edit this one slightly a bit more just to drag this back out. And I'm just going to show another couple of settings within the habitat mapping tool. And these are tools that will help you make a bit of a cleaner map. So the first one, well, we'll do one that can actually help a bit with distance. So this is enabling tooltips. So I've enabled tooltips right here, and I'm going to map a fence over here. So tooltips, you can see it pops up with the latitude and the longitude and the total length. So if I've got a fence all along here and I know it's, say, 50 meters and I know it starts here, I can see that the total length is increasing. And let me get to, well, just to be a little faster, I'll get to there, double click, and I've got my fence right there. Again, I would click habitat, it's a metal fence, and I will click create. So the other setting that I'm going to show is the snapping. The snapping tool, so I'm going to turn off tooltips for the moment. And you can use tooltips if you're doing an area with tooltips. It will show you sort of the meter squared of the area. So if you knew that, say, your meadow or your playground, we can do like if you're doing this area, say that was your playground, and you knew how many meters squared it was, you could draw it and it would tell you sort of the meter squared, so potentially give you a more accurate map. So do enable snapping, and then you press down, enabling it for the Habitat Mapper survey. So I will then just close this. So let's say I'm mapping this area, I'm mapping this as an area right here. What I can do, go down to ground without plants. I'll zoom in a little bit closer so you can see this. So as I'm doing it, you can see that it's automatically snapping to this other area that we've got. So that allows for a cleaner map. One thing, and I'll go over this in a little bit, one thing that affects the data is when polygons, especially areas, cross over one another. So having the snapping feature sort of prevents you really from doing this and prevents potential issues. So you can see, and it's also can tell me when I might be at, say, a right angle as well. So right there. So let's say I was just mapping that section right there. And again, press double click. Obviously, I've made a slight mistake there. So before I click create, I can also just make these slight edits. So yeah, we encourage you to use the snapping feature, as it just, yeah, as you can see, leads to a much cleaner map. So that is how to add your areas, your lines, and your points. As I said, we recommend starting off with your areas, then your lines, and then your points. And as I said before, and I'll say again, we really want your learners to be at the heart of it, to be the ones out there doing the mapping. So yeah, we've gone over tooltips and snapping, and we've gone over editing, editing and deleting different features. You can see another habitat map right there with some quite nice snapping that they have done. So now we're going to go over some habitat maps that have some issues. Now, you might be looking at this one and wondering, what are the issues that I'm seeing here? Well, the issues that we've got here is around these areas right here. So in this section, they have used the area feature to say that this is a playing field or lawn. But in this section, what you can see that is a car park. What they've done is they've done a line around the area. Now, for the purposes of the habitat mapping data, for the data set, that you and your learners are creating, but then also when you're working with your data down the line, the only data that is counted is the data that's covered by this line right here. So same for the playing field or lawn, it's the data that's under the color that is being counted. So for these guys here, they've used a line around the section, but what they should have done is used an area to do this section. Again, for here, they should have used an area to do the section. So they have used areas in some places, but in these spots right here, they have used a line feature instead of an area feature. Another one right here, you can see this map is slightly all over the place, very busy map. There's some rather erratic shapes, but the main thing I want to cover here is that there is significant overlapping in the different areas. So significant overlapping with the tall wild patches, with trees, with the mixed woodland below, with this playing field that's been mapped sort of several times. So that is sort of one thing to watch out for. So if you are out sort of doing this with your learners and a map like this sort of has been created, as I've shown, you can go in and edit and delete things afterwards. But just one thing to be aware of, that we really don't want, these areas crossing over each other, because that could really then, that really affects the data. And that means that couldn't be used in any of the sort of the analysis of any of the nature park data. Another mistake that's been made, and this is probably an example of not following the flow chart, is all these trees right here. If followed the flow chart, this would be seen as being a line of trees. So if you've got an area of woodland or trees in line, you don't also need to put microhabitat points of every single tree. If you've got a line of trees, that counts it. And that actually might be what they've done here, a line of trees, but they've also put each tree as its own individual point. So there's no need to do that. It is simply just putting a line of trees, or if it would qualify as an area under the flow chart, again, the flow chart will tell you, then you just put it as an area. This one right here, aside from having made the same mistake around putting lines instead of areas, they do not have a site boundary. So that means that their habitats are classified as being outside the nature park area, so don't get counted as part of the data. So make sure you've got your site boundary. And if you realize you've mapped your habitats without having done your site boundary, you can do your site boundary afterwards, and then you just simply click on the habitats that you've mapped. Once they're within a site boundary, your URN will pop up, and you can just click update, and those will then be linked to your URN. And then this one, very nice site boundary here, but they map this wildlife hedge outside of the site boundary. So just make sure you've done your site boundary first, and those are some of the issues potentially that we do see with maps. So conscious of time, but habitat mapping within your setting, just some ideas. On the habitat mapping page, we've got this checklist. So this is something, again, you could do with the students, or potentially with SLT, or rest of your educators, and going through the different habitats that you think you've got on your site, potentially the age group that you think might be doing it, just as a way to sort of strategize before you start your habitat mapping. So it's a really useful tool just to get some ideas down. But how might you run a habitat mapping session with your learners? So again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. We have a lot of case studies, which I'll mention in a little bit, about how different settings have done a habitat mapping session. I've been into a number of different settings and done habitat mapping sessions, and we've always done it in a variety of ways based on the number of students, or the habitats that the school has on their site, or just what is available to us. So you might divide your class potentially into, if you're fortunate to have different habitats on your site, dividing your class into different habitats and getting one group in your class to go and look at this area, one group to look at this area, or you might get everyone to focus on one habitat, potentially focus on one area and see if everyone is coming to the same conclusion about what sort of habitat that is. You might then, let's say, because we're looking really ideally for a whole school approach when it comes to nature park, obviously easier said than done. You might, we're talking about dividing that up. You might divide your year groups into different habitats, or you might get different years to look at the same habitat and see what they're getting. What are, let's say we're in secondary school, what are your year sevens seeing versus your sixth formers, or what are your, year threes seeing compared to your year sixes? Are they seeing a difference? We were in a school actually just the other day, and we had sixth formers working with the year sevens on the habitat mapping, and they were sort of supporting each other going through this. So there's a lot of different ways that you potentially could do it. We know some settings that maybe the Eco Club is the one that is focusing on the habitat mapping. So they've gone and done all the habitat mapping together, and then they've done an assembly for the rest of the school on what they found and how they have done it. You have to be, when you're doing the habitat mapping itself, using the tool, you have to be online. But obviously we recognize that there is not perfect Wi-Fi throughout every setting and all the outdoor space. So you can print off maps off of your site and have young people write the notes directly onto the map, onto the paper map. That's something that generally when I've gone into setting, that's the way we've sort of done it, giving each group a printed off sort of map, and you can print off maps through the Nature Park website, give them on a clipboard, and they're drawing their shape, making sure they label it on the paper map, and then we're coming back into the classroom and they're adding things on using sort of the interactive whiteboard at the front. And also, if you've got tablets and Signal, then you can use the Habitat Mapper tool outside. So as I said, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Discussing, if you do it in the classroom though, it's great whether you've done it outside or in the classroom at the end. Discussing the habitats and what each group has found together is a really, really nice activity. So just some examples, I went to a school in Newham, very, very grey school. We added, the students came up in groups and added the habitats they have found. We then looked at the habitat map at the end together, and we saw that it was very, very grey, a lot of non-natural and permeable surface, and very naturally, not sort of prompting by me, the conversation came up about flooding and things like that. We also went to a school that was quite green, a school in Stockport, and again, it made the students start to think their school was very green, but some primary schools near them were quite grey. So again, similar sort of conversations came up, thinking about what issues they might have on their site, but then thinking that the issues are not necessarily the same for every single setting. One site might be much more affected by flooding than another. So sort of just puts that into perspective. Make sure that your students are using the activities and the flowcharts just so they're getting to the right habitat category, or ideally. That is something I haven't sort of seen too many times, but it does happen every once in a while. So good if you're out with the students, just a reminder for them to use the flowchart. And you can access all the flowcharts on the website. You can download them all, and none of these flowcharts of activities are behind a login wall. It's simply the digital tool itself is behind a login wall. So if you frequently ask questions offline using different devices, the tool does require an internet connection. Therefore, you can't use it offline. It can be used on any device that you can access the web browser through. If you're using tablets or phones, you don't need to drag your finger to draw the feature for the arrows or the lines. You simply tap, and that's the same sort of representing a mouse click. What if you're struggling to do it? We know that there's a lot of people who might see this and think, oh, this is quite simple. I know exactly what I'm doing or how I'm going to do this. But if you're having trouble with doing it, or you're giving it a go and you're really struggling, there's a lot of resources out there to help you. So we have got a digital tool guide, which I'll just show it briefly. Click on it right here. This has been made by ArcGIS Story Maps. Hopefully this will load. But it's how to use all the different digital tools. So you can click on all of these, and it'll tell you how to use the Create the Site Boundary tool, habitat mapping, and the tracking change tool. So that's available for you to use. You can look at our case studies, which again are sort of real world examples of how different settings have done it. But also get in contact. There's always help out there if you'd like it. We're always willing to help, give advice. So you can contact us through our national mailbox, which you can, if you scroll down to the bottom of the website and just click contact us, that'll take you through to the mailbox. Or we've got fantastic regional teams up and down the country. So if you go on the website to find local help, you'll see a list of all the different emails for the different regional officers. You can see that they cover the entirety of the country, and they're made up of each regional team is made up of 2 people. And they're made up of people that work for the RHS and then LTL, Learning Through Landscapes. And they're all fantastic. They're all great at doing habitat mapping. And most importantly, they're all very nice people. So please don't hesitate to get in contact with them, because, we don't want people out there struggling and getting frustrated around this. There's always help if you would like it. Just a bit about what happens to the data. All the data that is captured by the tool is stored in ArcGIS Online, so you don't have to save things. as I mentioned. The data is automatically presented on the nature park map. So if you've got the nature park map up and you then add a bunch of habitats to it on the habitat mapper tool, just simply refresh the page and all the things that you put on will appear on there. There is also a sketch tool on the nature park map which you can use to practice habitat mapping as well. Make sure that you use your data for your evidence-based decisions about what you're potentially going to do on your site. But then also, I mentioned sort of the research going on by scientists at the Natural History Museum. That's all really, really important data that yourselves with your learners are collecting about what sort of habitats are on the educational estate. So it's being used in research as well. So just quickly, the next steps after you've done your habitat mapping, well, there's a lot of activities to help you keep getting to know your space. Habitat mapping isn't the only activity to do with that. But once you really feel like you've gotten to know your space, then you move on to identifying opportunities. So you can use things like the nature park map to really get a big visual graphic of your data, and you can start looking at those opportunities. Again, lots of resources alongside this. Then making decisions once you've identified those opportunities, and making a decision about what you want to do on your site. And again, hopefully those are evidence-based decisions. Then making that change happen using the evidence-based guidance that we've got. So we've got guidance on changing grey to green, on creating flower-rich grassy areas, and then also on ponds as well. And then once you've made those changes, then making sure that you record them through the tracking change tool, and also doing things like, let's say you've got an area with a couple flowers on, you've mapped it, you've done a pollinator count there. When you've then sort of recorded that change, let's say you've increased the amount of wildflowers on that area, you could then record that area through the tracking change tool as a wildflower area or a meadow, and then do a pollinator count there, and hopefully see the increase in pollinators that you've brought to the area. And I'll just briefly show the resource library right here. So you can browse, hopefully you've all seen this, but just in case you haven't, if you click on this, you can get to all the resources. But these are basically filters. So you can filter by early years, all the different key stages right here, also by subject, also by just activities, sort of curated activities, packages of how you might want to explore the nature park. There's also information about the quality assurance of these resources and about green skills. But just for the time being, I'll go on all resources. And you can filter by nature park steps. So let's say I've done a lot of the getting to know my space activities. I can click on identifying opportunities, and all these different things will pop up. So a lot of resources out there, and a lot of activities that you can do after habitat mapping. Well, that is where we're going to end this webinar today. I apologize slightly for running over, but thank you everyone so much for attending the webinar today. And just see if there's anything in the Q&A that we should cover at the end.
Hi, Tom. I think we've answered as we've gone along. So yeah, we've covered it all off. But if anyone has any other questions, please just send them through to the email address, the hello@educationnaturepark.org.uk. Someone will be in touch. So yeah, thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, and thanks everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and have fun habitat mapping. Thank you.